spent months hunting a cold, calculated serial killer. Every crime scene was clean, every clue deliberate, until I discovered the truth. The man I was tracking was Daniel Cross, a contract killer, and my wife's secret lover. Arresting him would have been easy. Letting him go so I could deal with him off the record? That was personal. In this savage, noir-style revenge story, I reveal how I lured him into a condemned factory, made him confess, and gave him the justice the badge couldn't deliver. This was my deadliest case, and my final line crossed. Rain rinsed the alley the way a guilty man scrubs his hands. Too late, too hard, leaving the stains where no one looks. The body lay face down between a split dumpster and a bent chain-link gate, palms open as if asking the sky for a do-over. 6 and 8 weeks. Same neighborhood radius, same silent hour, same single shot tight to the base of the skull. No mess, no spray, no second guess. Whoever did this didn't improvise. He rehearsed. Troy Mendez pulled the hood of his department parka forward and stepped around a rivulet of oil-threaded water. The ME hadn't arrived yet. Patrol had taped the mouth of the alley and pushed the gawkers back to the awnings where Rain became respectful. His partner, Alvarez, held a coffee in each hand and an umbrella clenched between shoulder and ear like a third limb. "You ever think about a desk?" Alvarez said, not handing Troy a cup. "Something with fluorescent lighting and miserable carpet?" "I tried marriage," Troy said. He crouched by the head. No stippling. Clean entry. The man had been executed from a distance measured with practice, not luck. 9mm subsonic if Troy had to bet. Suppressor. The alley had brick on both sides and a metal gate that would echo. Still, nobody heard a thing. The killer wasn't just careful. He was considerate of his own survival. Body cam on, the tiny red LED glowing like a conscience. He swept the beam of his flashlight low and slow. A single footprint hugged the edge of the gutter. Half print, half smear, Vibram-esque lug pattern, not department issue, not a random street shoe either. No brass. The shooter policed his own scene. There, near the victim's sleeve, a minuscule crescent of adhesive residue where a watchband had once been. The ghost liked souvenirs. Troy rose, back cracking, eyes tightening on the way the rain counted time off the rusted spokes of a broken shopping cart. He flicked his old academy lighter in his palm out of habit, thumb counting clicks he never ignited. He'd quit years ago. He kept the lighter anyway, something to do with his hands when he couldn't do anything with the truth. "Wallet?" he asked. "Gone," Alvarez said. "Phone smashed. Guy's clean like the others. Wrong place, wrong time. Either that or there's a lottery for being unlucky." "Unlucky has fingerprints," Troy said. "This is curated." He moved to the mouth of the alley, where the streetlight blew halos into the rain. Corner bodega. Rolling camera above the door, lens dark and taped over. Across the way, a laundromat CCTV pointed at the sidewalk, also wearing a strip of dull gray tape like a low-budget blindfold. Kill zone chosen, blind spots installed, exit routes washed by weather and time. The killer knew the camera angles the way Troy knew where the coffee ring would be on Alvarez's paperwork. The way you only know something after you've lived with it. Patrol handed over a thin folder they'd started. Troy skimmed. The victim had a day pass for the metro still in his pocket, soaked, the ink beginning to feather. Transfer stamp time, 1:52 a.m. He'd been alive 25 minutes ago. Close work. Troy looked down the slick street, following where the water decided to go. The runoff pooled at a storm drain where cigarette butts huddled like a small jury. No fresh ones. The shooter didn't smoke. Or he did and staged it somewhere else. Either way, discipline. "Captain's gonna want us at briefing by 7, Alvarez said. "You want me to call ME again?" "They're on their way," Troy said, though he hadn't checked. He kept scanning. The killer's signature was absence. No brass, no fibers, no mess. But people who erase themselves always leave a corner they miss. The tape on the bodega cam was torn with a left-hand bias. The ragged edge suggested a quick rip, not careful scissoring. He pictured the shooter reaching up, gloved, body angled toward the building to block the move from the street, left hand tearing while the right kept a concealed piece indexed along the forearm. Comfortable with both. Ambidextrous or trained to pretend. Troy followed a ghost of shoe rubber along the alley's lip to the chain-link fence. The gate lock was snapped clean, bolt cutters not a pry. Not many civilians keep those in their trunk for a late-night stroll. He crouched again, this time at the victim's hand. There was a crease in the skin where a watchband had been, but the skin beneath wasn't pale. The watch had been removed before death, not after. The killer chatted. Or staged. Either way, it wasn't robbery. It was ritual. Rain intensified, drumming the dumpster lids like fingers on a table when someone's making up their mind. The siren wail of the ME split the night, grew, then flattened as the van turned onto the block. Under the umbrella, Alvarez finally handed over the coffee. Hot, he warned. Troy didn't drink it. He was watching the victim's face as the thin river of water migrated, nudging the cheek, turning it just enough to catch the glint of something. He leaned in. Not metal. Blast. A sliver caught in the hairline. He nudged with a gloved fingertip and teased out the fragment. Safety glass, tempered from a phone screen maybe, but the edge wore a faint smear of something darker than rain. Not blood. Adhesive? He pocketed the thought. You okay? Alvarez asked, softer now. Define okay. Not hearing from Marissa again? Alvarez's mouth twitched. You two fight. We didn't make a schedule, Troy said. He checked his watch. 2:16 a.m. The ME crew rolled up, hoods up, cases clacking. Flash units popped. White, clinical, indifferent. Troy stepped back to give them room. He took out his phone to log a time stamp, thumb ready to type. It buzzed on its own. A text lit the screen, bright in the rain. Marissa, working late. Don't wait up. 2:17 a.m. Troy looked back at the victim. On the dead man's wrist, beneath the crease, a faint tan line ringed the skin where a watch had lived. The ME shifted the head to photograph the entry wound, and the man's other hand turned enough to show what the rain had been hiding. A cheap digital watch, cracked and still ticking, wedged under the cuff of his jacket like it had been slipped on in a hurry. Water bled across the face, but the numbers held. 2:17. The morgue was colder than the alley had been. Different kind of cold, though, not the bite of rain against skin, but the still, refrigerated kind that settled into your bones and stayed there. Troy stood by the stainless steel table as the ME Dr. Howard Lynn rolled the sheet back from the body's head. The overhead lights bleached the skin, made it impossible to tell if the man had been pale in life or if death had stolen the last color from him. Execution style, Lynn said without looking up from his scalpel. Close range, clean entry. No powder burns, so suppressed. Whoever pulled the trigger either had a lot of practice, or no soul. Troy didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the jagged edges of the cracked watch face they'd pulled from the victim's wrist. The second hand ticked on, indifferent to the room's silence. The same time Marissa's text had hit his phone. Lynn glanced at him. You look like you're trying to remember something. Just thinking how I've seen this before. The words weren't for Lynn. They were for Troy himself. 5 other bodies. 5 other alleys. 5 other watches missing from wrists, or replaced with fakes. Little calling cards in a game only the killer knew the rules to. The phone in Troy's pocket buzzed again. Not a call. Another text. He stepped away from the table and checked the screen. Marissa, seriously. Don't wait up. No emojis. No warmth. Just the kind of clipped distance that comes from months of avoiding eye contact over breakfast. He locked the screen and turned back to the table. You find anything under the nails? Clean. Whoever he tangled with knew not to leave DNA. No skin cells, no fibers. Either gloves or surgical precision. Troy thought about the taped-over cameras from the alley. You ever notice how some people clean up too well? Lynn raised an eyebrow. You saying this guy's killer is a pro? I'm saying pros leave less behind, but they don't leave nothing. Everybody misses something. It was an old truth in homicide work, killers aren't gods. They're human. Which meant they were careless somewhere. A camera they didn't tape, a witness they didn't see, a routine they thought no one noticed. Troy had built his career on waiting for those cracks to appear. Only this time the crack might lead somewhere personal. Somewhere he wasn't ready to shine a light on. Alvarez appeared in the doorway chewing on a toothpick. Captain's got us a war room. Wants you to run point on victimology. Troy nodded. I'll be there in a minute. Alvarez left without asking why Troy stayed behind. That was one thing about working together for years, you learned when not to ask. Troy stepped closer to the table, studying the victim's face as if the man might wake up and whisper a name. There was nothing. Just that cracked watch ticking in the evidence tray, each second syncing up too neatly with the memory of Marissa's late-night texts. He told himself it was just coincidence. He didn't believe it. When he finally left the autopsy room, the click of the door behind him felt louder than it should have. He walked toward the briefing room, folder in hand, but part of him wasn't headed there at all. Part of him was already driving home, wondering if his wife was in their bed, or in someone else's. The war room smelled like stale coffee and copier toner, the perfume of overworked detectives. A corkboard dominated the far wall, the kind of chaotic collage only homicide could love. Crime scene photos, maps with colored pins, victim profiles printed in 12-point Arial, and red string connecting the unconnected. Captain Reeves stood at the front, a brick of a man with a mustache that looked like it had seen too many crime scenes. 6 victims, he said, tapping the board. All male, all late 20s to mid-40s, no known connections. Single shot to the head, execution style. No brass. No witnesses. Troy leaned against the back wall, coffee in one hand, folder in the other. Alvarez sat at the table with his tie already loosened, pretending to take notes but actually drawing tic-tac-toe grids. Reeves continued. Forensics matched partial tread patterns at 3 scenes. It's not much, but the shoe is a Vibram sole tactical boot, custom make, rare distribution in state. More interesting, ballistics. Every round was a 9mm subsonic, same brand, same batch. Military surplus, not commercially sold here. Troy's head came up at that. Military surplus meant distribution was controlled, often to veterans groups, private security contractors, or training facilities. Not random street trade. Reeves clicked a remote, bringing up an image of a shipping invoice on the screen. We traced one batch to a private firing range just outside the city. Membership only. And guess what? One of our victims, John Lambert, was a member. 2 others visited at least once. Shooter could have met them there, Alvarez said, now awake. Or picked them, Troy added. Ranges are perfect for profiling. See how they stand, how they flinch. And no one blinks if you're asking strangers about their day. Reeves nodded. We're pulling membership lists. Alvarez Mendez, you're on the first batch of interviews. Start with anyone who's ex-military or private security. Troy took the list when Reeves handed it over. 200 names. But one near the middle made his eyes stall, Daniel Cross. No mugshot in their system, no priors. Address in the high-rent district, occupation listed as security consultant. Former Army, honorably discharged. He didn't know why the name stuck. Maybe it was the way it felt like a name you'd read in a glossy magazine profile, the kind that made normal men look up from their beer and feel smaller. Something? Alvarez asked over his shoulder as they headed out. Just a name, Troy said. But his grip on the list tightened. They hit the firing range mid-afternoon. The place was quiet, weekday lull. Inside, it smelled of cordite and gun oil the way every range did, but this one had leather chairs in the lounge and flat screens showing sports instead of safety PSAs. The manager, a rail-thin man in a polo shirt with the range's logo, met them in the lobby. Detectives. I heard you might be coming. Troy flashed his badge. We're looking for Daniel Cross. He in today. The manager checked a tablet. Was here 2 days ago. Likes to come late evenings. Always books lane 6. Brings his own suppressor, which is rare. Legal but rare. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. What's he shoot? Custom SIG 9mm. Subsonic rounds. Smooth as glass. Guy's a pro. Troy kept his face still, but the pieces were shifting inside his head. Subsonic 9mm. Suppressor. The ammo batch. The rare boots. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was enough to keep him up at night. He asked for security footage. The manager pulled up a feed from 2 nights ago. There was Cross, mid-30s, tall, athletic build, dark hair cropped close. Controlled movements. No wasted energy. He fired in slow, precise rhythm, grouping shots so tight they almost looked like one hole on the target. As Cross reloaded, he looked up toward the camera. Not suspicious, just aware. Like he knew exactly where every lens was. Troy didn't know it yet, but the next time he'd see that face, it wouldn't be on a monitor. It would be in the middle of something far more personal. 2 nights later, Troy sat alone in his unmarked sedan, rain smearing the windshield into streaks of distorted neon. The dashboard clock read 8:42 p.m. Daniel Cross had just left the firing range, same lane, same slow precision in his shots. Troy didn't bother telling Alvarez about this stakeout. Some things didn't belong in a partner's notebook. Cross drove a matte gray BMW, the kind of car that made no noise at idle and looked expensive without screaming it. Troy followed from 2 lengths back, weaving through side streets where the traffic thinned and the sodium lamps flickered in and out like bad memories. The BMW pulled into a quiet block lined with converted warehouses, loft apartments for people who didn't mind paying a premium to live somewhere their footsteps echoed. Cross parked under a single streetlight, killed the engine and stepped out. Even from here, Troy noticed it again, the economy of movement. No wasted gestures. Then she appeared. From the building's doorway, Marissa walked toward him. Black coat cinched at the waist, blonde hair spilling past her shoulders, heels clicking like a metronome. She wasn't looking at her phone, wasn't pretending to be surprised. She was already smiling. Troy's stomach locked. Cross closed the distance in 4 strides. She tilted her face up. He kissed her without hesitation, his hand at the back of her neck like he'd done it 100 times. She leaned in, familiar, unhurried. Troy's body cam was still on, the small red dot pulsing on his chest. For a moment, the professional in him considered the value of evidence. The husband in him considered putting a round through the BMW's rear window. Instead he just watched. They talked for a moment, close, too close, before heading into the building together. Cross didn't even glance over his shoulder. He didn't need to. Men like him assumed they were untouchable. Troy sat there long after the door shut, the rain ticking against the roof. Every instinct he'd honed as a detective told him not to take this personally, to separate the suspect from the betrayal. But every beat of his pulse said otherwise. Finally he started the car and pulled away. But he didn't go home. He circled the block twice, parked in a shadow across the street and waited. 2 hours later they emerged again. Cross was talking. Marissa was laughing, the kind of laugh she hadn't given Troy in years. Cross kissed her cheek before she walked toward her own car, a few doors down. He watched her go before getting into the BMW. Troy's hand tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't just a suspect anymore. This was a man who had stepped inside his home without ever setting foot in it. And if Troy was right about the pattern, he had stepped inside a killing field too. The next morning, Troy had Cross in an interview room. Not under arrest, not even booked, just a chat to clear some things up. It was one of the smaller rooms, the kind with a single camera in the corner and no two-way glass. The walls weren't actually closer together, but the lighting made them feel like they were pressing in. Troy chose it on purpose. Cross sat with his arms loose on the table, posture casual but coiled, like a man who could go from charming to dangerous in one breath. The tailored jacket said money, the scuffed knuckles said otherwise. Troy dropped a slim file onto the table. "Appreciate you coming in, Daniel. We're running down leads on a series of homicides. Your name came up in connection to a firing range our victims used." Cross gave an easy smile. "And here I thought you just wanted to meet me." Troy didn't smile back. 6 men are dead. All shot with subsonic 9mm rounds from a suppressor. Same kind you use. Same ammo batch the range ordered. Cross shrugged. Lot of people use subsonics. Makes for a smoother recoil. And as for the suppressor, it's legal. I've got the paperwork if you want to see it. I've seen it, Troy said. He slid a photo across the table, the alley from the latest crime scene. Recognize him? Cross glanced at it, then back up, expression neutral. Never seen him before. Troy leaned forward. You're sure? Because I've been following this pattern for months, and it keeps coming back to people you've been around. Same range. Same boots. Same time of night. Cross tilted his head slightly, studying Troy the way predators study each other. Detective, you got any actual evidence, or are we just talking about your hunch? Troy let the silence stretch. He wanted Cross to fill it, but Cross didn't. He just sat there, that faint smirk never leaving. Tell me something, Troy said finally. What's your relationship with Marissa Mendez? That got him. It was quick. A fractional hesitation before the smirk returned, a microsecond of calculation. She's a friend, Cross said lightly. Met her at a charity event. You weren't there. The room went still. Troy didn't break eye contact. You see her often? Every now and then. Cross leaned back, comfortable again. She's a beautiful woman. I imagine she gets lonely. The line landed like a slap. Troy kept his voice steady. This conversation stays between us, Daniel. For now. Cross nodded, a slow grin spreading. I get it. You've got your job, I've got mine. What's your job? Problem solving, Cross said. Sometimes people have problems that need removing. It wasn't a confession. Not legally. But it was enough to make Troy's pulse thrum in his ears. He gathered the file, stood and walked to the door. Thanks for coming in. You're free to go. Cross looked genuinely amused. Just like that. Just like that. Because Troy wasn't going to catch this man in a courtroom. He was going to catch him somewhere the badge couldn't follow. Troy could feel the eyes on him the moment he stepped back into the bullpen. Alvarez was leaning against a filing cabinet, arms crossed, eyebrows raised in that what the hell was that? Way only a longtime partner could pull off. You cut him loose? Alvarez asked, keeping his voice low but tight. Not enough to hold him, Troy said flatly, walking past to his desk. Not enough to hold him? He matches the ammo, the boots, and now he's in your personal life. Alvarez stopped himself, glancing around. You sure you're not letting this get? I'm sure, Troy said, tone sharpening just enough to make Alvarez back off. From across the room, Captain Reeves stepped out of his office, looking like he'd just bitten into bad coffee grounds. Mendez. My office. Now. Inside, Reeves shut the door and planted himself behind his desk. You want to tell me why you just let my prime suspect stroll out of here? No probable cause, Troy said. We've got circumstantial links but no physical evidence. You put him in a holding cell, his lawyer chews us up in 30 minutes, and the DA laughs us out of the building. Reeves' eyes narrowed. And in the meantime he kills again? Not if I get to him first, Troy said before he could stop himself. That hung in the air, heavier than the rain outside. Reeves leaned back, studying him like he was weighing whether to suspend him or see where this went. You're walking a line, Mendez? I've been walking it my whole career, Troy said, meeting his gaze. Reeves finally waved him off. Fine. But you breathe wrong and I pull you. Got it? Troy didn't answer. He left the office, grabbed his coat, and headed for the elevator without looking at Alvarez. By nightfall he was parked 2 blocks from Cross's high-rise, watching from the shadows. Through binoculars, he tracked every movement. The doorman who greeted Cross by name, the late-night food deliveries, the unfamiliar faces coming and going. Cross lived like a man without fear. No curtains drawn, no hesitations on the street. It wasn't arrogance. It was calculation. At 11:37 p.m., Cross exited the building with a slim duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He walked like he was going somewhere he'd been before, somewhere important. Troy's gut told him this was work, the kind of work. He followed at a careful distance, lights off, 2 cars between them. They drove into the industrial district, where the streetlights died and the warehouses turned into dark silhouettes. Cross parked beside a loading dock, killed the lights and disappeared inside. Troy waited. Minutes passed. Then a different man emerged, not Cross but a wiry figure in a hoodie carrying a small case. They exchanged a few words before the hooded man walked off in the opposite direction. Troy didn't need to see inside the case to know. Guns, cash or both. He just watched a contract killer pick up his next job. And Troy had no intention of letting him finish it. The first rule of going off record is that you stop looking like a cop. No unmarked sedans, no department radios, no familiar routes. Troy swapped his car for a rust-pocked Chevy bought cash from a guy who didn't ask for a name. He ditched the badge for plain street clothes and carried his Glock in an ankle holster instead of his usual side rig. From then on, his days belonged to the department. His nights belonged to Cross. The first week, Troy tracked him everywhere. The man's life was a maze of controlled movements. Firing range on Tuesdays, meetings in sleek coffee shops where the conversation was too low for any mic to catch, late-night drives to empty lots, then back to his high-rise like nothing happened. On Thursday, Troy tailed him to an upscale restaurant on the river. Cross sat in a corner booth with a man in an expensive suit. Neither smiled. The man slid a thick envelope across the table. Cross slid a small flash drive back. The exchange was so clean, so practiced, it could have been a scene from an instructional video titled How to Survive in the Underworld. By the second week, Troy started noticing the shadows inside the shadows. The same black SUV parked a block from Cross's building. The same wiry man from the loading dock 2 weeks earlier, now meeting Cross twice in one night. Cross wasn't just a lone wolf, he was part of a pack. And every time Troy thought about bringing the department in, he pictured Marissa in that black coat, laughing under the streetlight. No, this wasn't a case anymore. This was a debt. One night he caught a break. Cross drove to a small marina on the edge of the city. The place was quiet, wind snapping against the sails of docked boats. Cross boarded a modest 30-footer and went below deck with 2 other men. Through binoculars, Troy caught snippets of their conversation. Coordinates, dates, and the word delivery. Half an hour later, Cross emerged alone, duffel bag in hand. When he drove away, Troy broke into the boat's cabin. It smelled of diesel and damp rope. On the table, a laminated map was marked with 3 red X's, all in remote industrial zones where 2 of their homicide victims had last been seen alive. Troy took photos with his phone, careful not to disturb anything. He wasn't building a case. He was building leverage. By the 3rd week, Troy knew Cross's rhythms better than he knew his own. He knew when the man slept, when he exercised, when he went hunting. And he knew something else. Cross had a job coming up. The signs were all there. Late-night equipment checks, a fresh set of tactical boots, and a brief meeting with the wiry man who handed him a folded piece of paper. When Cross drove away, Troy followed. The destination was an abandoned warehouse on the south side. and in the sodium glow spilling through a cracked window, Troy caught sight of something that made his chest go cold. Marissa. She was inside pacing. Cross stepped in, shut the door, and they spoke too low for Troy to hear. But he saw the way she looked at him, not with love but with fear. She was in deeper than she'd ever admit. Troy didn't go home that night. He waited until Cross left the warehouse, followed him far enough to make sure he was headed back to the high-rise, then doubled back. Marissa answered her own front door. Hair up, hoodie zipped, eyes flicking past him like she was expecting someone else. "We need to talk," Troy said. She stepped aside reluctantly, arms folded. "If this is about you following me, it's about him." Her mouth tightened. She moved to the kitchen, grabbing a glass and filling it from the tap like they were having a normal conversation. "Daniels? Complicated. That's one word for a contract killer," Troy said. The glass froze halfway to her lips. She didn't ask how he knew. She didn't deny it. "Marissa." His voice was flat, cop voice. "How long?" She set the glass down too carefully. "Almost a year." Troy didn't flinch. "You know what he is?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Not at first. But he told me things. Enough to scare me. Enough to make me realize leaving wasn't an option." "That's crap." "No, Troy." Her voice cracked now. "You don't understand. He's not just dangerous. He owns people. He has dirt on half the city's private security firms, politicians. He said if I walked I'd end up like..." She stopped herself. "Like the 6 men he's executed?" Her eyes darted away. He stepped closer. "Tell me why you're still seeing him." Her answer was barely a whisper. "Because he won't let me go. And because, if I keep him happy, he keeps me alive." Troy's jaw tightened until it hurt. "You think he won't kill you when you stop being useful? You think he won't kill me just to hurt you?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." He studied her, the rise and fall of her breath, the way her hands gripped the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He'd seen a lot of liars in interrogation rooms, but this wasn't that. This was someone trapped. Still, she'd chosen him once. And now she'd made her choice again. Troy turned for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic in her voice. "Out," he said without looking back. "If he wants you so bad, I'll make sure he gets you, one last time." Troy didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. Not because of the adrenaline, though that burned through him like jet fuel, but because he was too busy turning the plan over in his head, running every angle until there were no surprises left. If Cross was going to die, it wasn't going to be in a back alley with no witnesses. It was going to be in a place where Troy controlled everything. The location came to him almost immediately. A derelict garment factory on the east side, condemned for demolition in 2 weeks. The place had no power, no neighbors, and no reason for anyone to wander in. It also had a basement level with only one way out. He spent the first night rigging it, not with bombs, not yet, but with hidden cameras and a portable generator to feed them. He stashed 2 backup drives in separate corners of the building, ensuring that even if Cross smashed the first, there'd be more. On the second night, Troy set the bait. Marissa was the hardest part. She agreed quicker than he expected, not because she trusted him, but because she hated Cross enough to want him gone. "He'll come if I ask," she said. "But he'll bring a gun." "That's fine," Troy said. "I want him armed. It'll make the footage better." She gave him a long, searching look. "This isn't about arresting him, is it?" He didn't answer. The message was simple. One last meeting, somewhere private, no strings. A place where they could end things without an audience. Troy wrote the exact words for her to send, making sure it sounded like a farewell, the kind of goodbye that lures a man who hates losing control. He knew Cross wouldn't show up on time. Men like him preferred to arrive fashionably late to prove they weren't on anyone's clock. That worked in Troy's favor. It gave him time to settle in the shadows, to check every camera angle, to feel the weight of his Glock in the ankle holster. The night of the meet, the air was thick with that heavy metallic scent just before a storm breaks. Inside the factory, dust hung in the beams of Troy's flashlight like suspended ash. Marissa stood near the center of the room, every muscle in her body tense. She wore the same black coat she'd worn the night Troy first saw her with Cross. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice a taut wire. "Not at all," Troy said. "That's how I know it's worth doing." When Cross arrived, it was exactly how Troy pictured it. Slow footsteps echoing on the concrete, silhouette framed in the doorway, head tilted in that smug way that made you want to put a bullet in him on sight. He glanced at Marissa, then at the shadows where Troy stood just out of the light. "Well," Cross said, smiling faintly, "isn't this cozy?" Cross stepped farther into the factory, the door swinging shut behind him with a metallic groan. The storm outside broke, rain hammering the roof in irregular bursts. Each step he took echoed like a countdown. Marissa's breathing quickened, but she stayed put in the cone of light Troy had set for the cameras. Cross's gaze slid to her first. "You said you wanted to end things," he said, voice low, smooth. "I assumed you meant without an audience." "That's the thing about endings," Troy said from the shadows. "They're more satisfying with a witness." Cross's head turned slowly toward him, that faint smirk forming again. "Detective Mendez. I was wondering when you'd stop hiding behind your badge." "I'm not here as a cop," Troy said, stepping into the light. No badge on his belt. No body cam blinking. Just him and the Glock resting low but ready. Cross's eyes flicked to the gun, then back to Troy's face. "If you're going to kill me, you should know. No one will miss me. And no one will believe you didn't plant the evidence." Troy took a slow step forward. "I don't need them to believe anything. I just need them to see it." From the corner of the room, the faint red glow of a camera light blinked. Cross's gaze darted toward it, and in that fraction of distraction Troy moved. He kicked the duffel from Cross's grip. It hit the ground, unzipped, spilling a suppressed SIG, spare mags and a folded piece of paper. Troy glanced at it just long enough to see names. 3. 2 already dead. The third, Marissa. Her gasp cracked the tension. Troy's voice went cold. "Say it." Cross straightened, adjusting his stance like a fighter testing his reach. "Say what?" "Say you killed them." "You really think I'm going to?" Troy squeezed the trigger just enough to make the hammer click. Not fire. Just click. The sound rattled the space between them. Cross smiled, but it was tighter now. "Fine. Yes, I killed them. All 6. And I was going to kill her." He jerked his chin toward Marissa. "But not before I made sure you watched her choose me again." The words hit harder than the confession. Troy didn't hesitate. The shot was clean, center mass. Cross staggered back into the shadows, colliding with one of the factory's load-bearing columns. His gun clattered to the floor. He sank down slowly, leaving a dark smear on the concrete. Troy holstered his weapon and crossed the room, tearing the folded list in half before shoving it into his pocket. He didn't look at Marissa. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the cameras kept recording. By the time Troy left the building, the rain had washed most of the blood into the cracks in the floor. 2 days later, demolition crews would take the rest. The city moved on like it always did. The headlines carried a double homicide from across town, a mayoral scandal, a winning lottery ticket. No one wrote about the condemned garment factory that came down in the rain, or the man who vanished from its shadowed halls. Troy sat in his apartment 3 nights later, blinds half drawn against the sodium glare outside. The badge lay on the table in front of him, beside a half-empty glass and the cracked lighter he'd carried since the academy. His service weapon sat in the safe, untouched. The Glock he'd used at the factory wasn't in his possession anymore. In the desk drawer was a manila folder without a case number. Inside, photos of 6 men, maps of alleyways, ballistics reports, and one grainy still from the factory's camera showing Cross's face just before the end. It wasn't an official case file. It never would be. Marissa had left without a word. She didn't return to their apartment for her things, she sent a cousin to collect them. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't care. In the quiet, Troy flicked the lighter open and closed, counting the clicks like he'd counted the beats between Cross's breaths in that last meeting. He thought about the line he'd crossed, the one cops joke about in bars but tell themselves they'll never really touch. He hadn't just crossed it, he'd erased it. Some nights, he'd wonder if justice and vengeance were ever different things, or if they were just 2 sides of the same worn coin. But tonight wasn't one of those nights. Tonight he knew exactly what he'd done. Somewhere in the city, another name would go on another list. Somewhere else, another detective would start connecting dots. But for Troy Mendez, this case was done. The file would never close because it had never officially opened. And that was fine. Because the only person who needed to know the truth was him.